Today's lecture is with the engagements of Craftsmanship, of whom you already see the curator, Tomas Ooms, on the screen, who will give the floor later for further introductions.
Thank you, Lilet. Maybe Victoria and Camille, you can also put on your screen so we can already see you. Looking forward to it. Let me briefly introduce it and get you all into, I think, hopefully the right mood. And I would like to do that by sharing an image. You're looking here at a detail from the Basilica cisterns in Istanbul. And you're looking at a very specific detail. You're looking at the head of the Medusa, which is placed upside down under this column in the southwest corner of the cisterns, the Basilica cisterns in Istanbul. And the Medusa head dates from the end of the Roman period, and the Basilica dates from the 16th, 17th century. And I want to show you this image to start thinking about circularity in a particular way. Because of course, this Medusa head probably comes from a temple somewhere, was not used or was not intended probably to be used in this way. And there are two of them. There is one, the one that you see here, and there is one which is tilted sideways. And one of the theories is obviously they needed some kind of support for this column. So they reused this beautifully carved head of the Medusa. And the theory says that it is placed upside down to avoid bad omens. This other head of the Medusa is tilted sideways. And that is done because otherwise it would be too high to fit under the column. And I think it's that particular unexpected mindset of where something that was intended to ornament a temple or a building after so many years became this crucial, but maybe inappropriate or unexpected use of a certain material. I'm going to stop to share my screen. And it is with great pleasure that today we have here as a speaker, not an architect, not a designer, but actually a contractor. It's a company, a building company. And that gives me enormous amount of pleasure that for that speaker, we have such a turnout. If you could conceive a book that would tell the history of the world from the viewpoint of storage, and how storage is one of the important factors defining a culture, then we think of the storage of grain, the storage of water, the storage of knowledge. But today, the storage, obviously, of data, energy, CO2, they are at the forefront of our defining debates. And circularity, in essence, is a logistic process in which a series of variables and parameters need to fit and resonate. That is probability, availability, fitability. Remember the Medusa. And not unimportantly, the human condition. And this kind of volatility and fluidity requires an adapted design attitude and construction attitude. Circularity is not something new, obviously. It happened throughout history, always and everywhere. And mainly for reasons different than today. But nevertheless, reuse was the obvious way. According to Walter Stijl, there existed previously different forms of circular economy, but this was a circular economy imposed by the scarcity of resources. Today, we have a society where instead of a society of scarcity, there is a society of surplus, of over. And the circular economy that is needed now is not about managing that scarcity, but it is about managing stocks, managing surplus. In the 19th century, material was expensive and labor was cheap, and this partly explains why constructions of that time are so material conscious. Circularity, the intensive reuse of land, structures, spaces, and materials will only reach a turning point from pilot projects through a mainstream attitude from the moment it will be cheaper to reuse than it is to resource new materials. What we can do at the moment in our rather rich society is to refresh our memory and knowledge in how it was again that we used to reuse. As designers, we do not only conceive and create transferable spatial conditions. The most important difference with historical examples of reuse is that at the moment we act with premeditation in gathering knowledge and experience in the hope that whoever follows us finds this knowledge and experience and material useful. But I think we also need to be aware, or we are convinced that, remember the Medusa, most likely those who will come after us will use it in different, unanticipated ways. On the other hand, today, working within the circularity paradigm is a way to create interesting and unanticipated architecture. So, time to talk seriously about circularity, or better, time for a talk on serious circularity. Not a case of kicking the can, not a case of educated guessing and imaginary foresight, but circularity and reuse here and now, today. Time not of washing our hands in a greenish dye, but to make them dirty. And it is, or was, with a great pleasure that I collaborated with Rotor during the conception, the construction of a large project in Brussels. And it is now great pleasure to host them here tonight in the Going Public lectures at the Craftsmanship engagement of the Faculty of Architecture. Victoria and Camille, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Thomas, for the very nice and complete introduction about reuse. My name is Victoria. I'm here with a collaborator, Camille. Both of us have been working for Rotor DC for almost 2 years. So we are quite young collaborators. I think first I would just like to make the difference between Rotor and Rotor DC for the ones that don't know. So Rotor is a visitor, which is a design and research studio mainly that is interested about the fluxes of materials and the idea of obsolescence in general. And in 2016, they created Rotor DC, which is a spin-off of Rotor. So Rotor DC is a cooperative active in dismantling and reselling of contemporary building elements. We mainly focus on the tertiary sector of the last decades, with the goal to facilitate reuse of building materials in large-scale projects. So before we start the lecture, we just wanted to introduce you the place where we work. So I will start sharing my screen. All right. So, okay. So this is Leonidas, which is the old chocolate factory of Leonidas, the building where we work, which is situated in Anderlecht, somewhere in between the canal and Bruxelles-Midi train station. So it's 2,500 meters, which functions as a shop, warehouse, office, the cleaning station, and all of these stations we will talk about later on in the lecture. So in this talk, we will not go into depth on why building circular is important. We will start with the idea that you are familiar with the idea of reusing materials and the environmental, social, and cultural advantages of it. So our work is generally known for the sometimes spectacular images of deconstruction sites it produces. While the rest of the chain you can see here is mostly unknown. So we would like to introduce you in a very practical way through the eyes of the materials, the journey the materials go through from the extraction still the redestination of the materials. So I will let Camille start with this journey.
Okay, so to illustrate this process materials go through, we chose the image of the myth of the Fountain of Youth, represented here by Lucas Cranach in 1546. And as you can see on the painting, you see on the left, old and ugly woman taken to the fountain and plunged, immersed into the regenerating waters. And these women emerge rejuvenated and desirable. For us, the materials kind of follow the same path. After being disassembled, materials are soaked in the bath of youth and come out as new and ready for use. We also like to say that the surface of the water seems calm, but part is very turbulent. And from the surface of the water, it is difficult to see what is happening below. During this lecture, we will detail the unseen bottom of the bath. And we will first start by exploring what happens outside of the water during the deconstruction phase. What we can say is that we see the building as an assemblage of thousands of joint pieces, and the building itself constitutes the last step in the construction chain. In the case of Rotor DC's work, Rotor DC's practice, the life of a large number of pieces is extended through the deconstruction process. Of this construction is then the disassembly of these dozens of parts, and it is a moment in which the multiple modes of junctions are challenged. The materials that were part of the building as a whole are dismantled one by one. But before all this deconstruction work take place, we make a first inventory of potential reusable materials. And those materials are evaluated according to various criteria as their heritage and symbolic value, also their method of fixing, the type of mortar, of glue, etc., their size, their weight, and moreover, their ability to be stored and transported on a pallet. That's why we like to talk about deconstruction as an act of selection, in which we then perform kind of as curators. What is important to know also is that every deconstruction work begins with an experimental phase, as a lot of phases afterwards are very experimental as well. So any element to be detached from its original position is first subjected to disassembly test. We struggle with the extraction difficulty of materials, which sometimes leads to loss of some pieces of the materials. In this video, ceramic tiles sometimes mean breaking as well.
Okay, just
Okay.
go on.
Once the dismantling technique is set, the movement of deconstruction begins. It is a movement led by the human body. The workforce and the use of hands are crucial in the construction works, and it becomes kind of an immersive physical experience. However, we try as much as possible when it's needed to sometimes make the use of machines. This we have to settle on a case-by-case basis, and we need to adapt that to every situation. As you can see here, it's the extraction of blue limestone on an exterior facade of a building in Brussels, an office building near De Brocaire. So it was quite difficult because we needed to have sufficient space between the wall and the tile for the grapple to grab the tile, which results on these kind of images, quite of like impressive. What is important to know as well is that during their lifetime, buildings undergo transformation spread throughout several years. And the original components and the fastening system are often replaced. Different layers of the building are modified. So almost every time, we need to reconsider the techniques of disassembling. For example, what worked in a building doesn't work in another one. What worked for a tile in a certain area of the building might not work for another one. And just as a lot of tasks in the process of reuse, it requires a constant readaptation to the context. We then need to be very attentive and constantly modify our ways of dismantling. Then the materials are stacked and strapped on pallets, and they make their way to Rotor DC's warehouse. We also need to adapt and think a lot about the ways of loading in function of the space we have in the street and other factors. With our colleagues here at DC, we like to talk about some iconic arrivals at our warehouse. As I was saying, loading and unloading often happens to be a very experimental act, as you can see. And once the deconstruction stage is over, the material goes through a process of cleaning, revalorizing, and reworking. We can say that we see deconstruction and reuse not only as a sort of art of destruction or dismantling, but also as an art of regeneration, which includes several stages of adjustments necessary for reuse. So as we said earlier, the whole process can be compared to a fountain of youth, a bath of youth, in which material enters old and sometimes unusable and exits regenerated and ready for reuse. While the surface of the water is smooth, its unseen bottom is in perpetual motion. And the stage of reconditioning also requires a constant readaptation. Each material becomes a unique case and has to be tested, experimented in a concrete manner. The tests are directly made on the materials itself, and it is kind of a research by doing and by testing on the things itself. The practice of deconstruction leaves materials with traces of their previous life, and in some cases, these traces are to be removed in order to revalorize each component. And in other cases, these traces are part of the value of the material, in the case of patina, for example. Here is our colleague Danielle using a high-pressure water jet to rinse reused toilet. The cleaning process also requires some technical knowledge about the materials and its composition in order to maintain or enhance its value, because the material reacts differently to a certain product, a certain gesture, or a certain surface. In the case of the processing chain, the human hand is essential as well, because regeneration is an irregular process, essentially unfit for mechanization. There's also a practice of repetitive gestures, although these gestures are different every time. A large part of our work is also based on experiments to facilitate the processing of materials and to make it more efficient. So for this purpose, we have tried various machines. We adapted and set up some machines. As you can see, this stand for pneumatic drilling of ceramic tiles to take off the leftovers of mortars before plunging the tiles in the acid bath. So the aim is to remove the residues of a prior fixation, but without removing the traces of wear that often add some value to the material. We see it as a delicate operation, which in some cases is a kind of repetition of a caress and a friction that may also leave traces. In a way, cleaning contributes to the alteration of the material. Also, during this process, a significant part of the materials can break. We have some loss at this stage as well. At the hotel house and workshop, we also have a lighting workshop with all the necessary equipment. Here you can see our colleague Emmanuel recabling some lights. We also have set up a workshop for the treatment of wood and installed various machines. In particular, for the treatment of parquet, these are programs that our colleague Benoit made to systematize the processing chain of parquet. You can even see the traces of the pallet on the floor. And it was thought to be as efficient as possible in terms of time and manpower. It was in the end quite complex to make. So now I will pass the word to Victoria.
Okay, so once the materials are at Rotor, they need to be subjected to an accurate inventory. So the materials are counted, measured, examined for defaults, and documented. As I said, this needs to happen as accurately as possible. At the moment the materials are counted, they receive a serial number and start existing as an individual entity. So the black terracotta floor laid in the 1850s in Antwerp City Hall you saw just before becomes an individual tomate again. The radiator cover, an emblematic furnishing in the 70s office environments, becomes a curved plywood panel. The task of making an inventory is often a serious mental exercise, as incoming materials are quite diverse and often new to us. So a way of listing them has to be reinvented almost every time. This often ends up in endless Excel sheets, which we try to make as less complicated as possible. This is an example of a sheet made by Luna, a collaborator, for the shelves in plexiglass that we recently dismantled at a construction site. So it generated a lot of pieces. In order to be able to understand the batch and remantle them, this was our communication tool. So the inventory is often repetitive labor. So the human eye is not infallible. So a marge has to be calculated. Inventory mistakes are often noticed further on, so it's important. This work is very related as well to the dismantling on the deconstruction side itself. Has the quality already been checked on site? Are the materials already split in batches by size, quality, origin? Too often, the deconstruction side happens in a total rush due to extremely short delays of demolition schedules. So the very last minute interventions by Rotor makes it sometimes impossible to select them carefully. So we also work with very different teams. Sometimes the same teams work on the deconstruction side and in the reconditioning, but it happens that it mixes up. So this is a collective work in which ways are being made up to make materials and the communication flow or circulate as smooth as possible, and to avoid the less of pressure knowledge. Trying to systematize reuse is very hard due to the range of diversity of materials, its condition, origin, etc. It's interesting though to work in an experimental atmosphere, but it's often juggling with the irregular and the unforeseen. This interferes with the pure economic thinking concerning the value of the material and efficiency. So then there is the enjoyable work of documentation, finding archival documents like old sale catalogs, which gives a better understanding about the historic value of the extracted materials. So this, for example, is a catalog of 1940s of a French ceramic tile manufacturer. So most of the tiles we extract here are either French, either Belgium. We have a lot of Belgian brands, and then we can see on the back often from which year they date or guess more or less. So that's also very interesting. So coming at the surface, the materials enter in communication with the exterior. The materials should now be ready for sale and direct installation without any hassle. So we use made easy, in other words. Products are made for every material on the website, together with their exact stock, which shows what is exactly available in our warehouse in real time, which gives a certain reassurance to work and trust reused elements. So materials are then photographed in our studio. An accurate description is given in the product page on the website. A decision is made how they are sold, for example, per square meter or per piece or per batch. The question of resale price is discussed. This is also juggling with the new material price often and the material handling time that is needed. A sample is placed in our showroom, and then comes also the phase of packaging and selling, etc. So this smooth surface of the website and the material ready for installation is often quite troubled though. because the unforeseen and the unknown are often still present. Inventory mistakes are noticed often. So a part of the job is as well answering emails, fix sale problems, and again, juggling with the acceptance for defaults in second-hand materials. So after this said, not all we emerge from the surface. So this is our depot, which actually never looks the same because the wax are constantly moving in order to be able to access other wax on the back of them. So it's also important to make sure materials get out of there fast to make place for new materials. Some materials are pushed back, totally forgotten until urgency for space is there again. So also new logistics and storage methods are to be rethought for incoming materials. Like for example, wood, we are not used to sell wood, but then we decided to store them vertically because we didn't have plates, which is okay for standing in the rain, etc. So it's often a matter of taking decisions, what to store, what to refuse, what to throw away. It's easy to fill a warehouse with second-hand materials, but it's far more complex to assure the redistribution and a circulation of the stock. So otherwise materials end up just being a meaningless pile of trash in the warehouse. So,
Okay, so we wanted to illustrate this process in a bit more concrete manner with this example of marble, which is kind of iconic for us. This is a Carrara marble tiles from the North Station in Brussels. It's a site Rotor DC intervened in 2019 before the partial renewal of the station. And Rotor DC dismantled, amongst others, several hundreds of square meters of marble. Marble is actually a very interesting example for reuse for multiple reasons. It's a precious materials, quite expensive, and it's also limited resources. It's kind of a product resulting from petrified life with striking colors and patterns. What is also a good reason to reuse marble is that often ancient placement techniques are still applied, so mortar or plaster, to preserve the slabs, which also make it then easier to extract. The slabs are sealed together with joints, and when the joints are soft, the slab can be extracted with only a crowbar. But if the joints are more solid, it is necessary to use a side grinder to split the slabs. And the wall tiles are also attached with brackets and must be cut free, as you saw here on the video. Here on the floor, the slabs were laid on a non-cement base, which makes removing easier. If we are not too much rush, we check each slab for quality at the construction site already. It's really a collaborative work at many levels, at very different stages of the process of the material, which makes it quite exciting as well. The slabs are then strapped and stacked on pallets and ready for transport until Rotor DC's warehouse in Anderlecht. So sometimes in a rush, we need to adapt to the circumstance and the contingency of the site. Here, we had to use this type of loading system to bring the pallets to the lower level, to the truck. It was kind of an impressive moment. Our colleague Sebastian bringing the pallets. By the way, I hope you can see the video well. I don't know what you see.
Well, the videos are, we can see them, but they are a bit moving, a bit uneven. So maybe you try to close your own camera. Maybe that helps in the video.
Okay.
For the
But
benefit.
anyway, the video is over.
It's
so.
over, yeah.
Yeah, but it's in general, so maybe it could be nice to try because.
Okay, thanks for telling us.
Ah, yeah, okay. Great.
Yeah, great.
We should have done that
Earlier. Okay.
I think you need to click. Oh.
Okay. So then the pallets are arriving in Anderlecht at our warehouse. They need some treatment. Here we treat the edges of the slabs with a stone grinder. They have to pass there one by one, and we scrub away the remaining joints on the sides. The edges are also straightened out. We also make inventory sheets of this kind for marble. The tiles are cleaned and classified according to quality, but also to tint, size, or other variations criteria. And they are usually inventoried by batch, per batch, or per square meters. Our colorator Benoit organizing here the marble slabs, which are stored outside in the courtyard and separated from each other by battens to not have contact with each other. Then one representative slab goes to the studio and is taken in picture and arrives finally on the website with a description that is as accurate as possible, because we also make online sale possible in some case, and that can lead to some troubles if the description doesn't correspond exactly to the characteristics of the materials. It is also placed in display in our showroom with different treatment tests, polishing, or different products that we apply on the marble. We would like also to show some examples of reuse of this Carrara marble tile. Here it's the example of a duplex in Saint-Gilles. And some of the slabs have been reused in the facade. And it was made by the architect Guillaume Soccar. This is a nice example of exterior reuse of the marble slabs. We have here another example of the marble slabs reused in a kitchen. It's actually the kitchen collaborator Lionel Biet. And they were stored quite a long time at Rotor DC's warehouse, even though the works hadn't started, because as it's a second-hand materials, you need to make sure to have on time the materials you have, and it might have been sold before. So it's always a problem or a thing to deal with when you reuse materials for construction. And what it told us is that the design was really based on the size of the slabs, so they didn't have to cut it so much. And this makes an irregular rhythm and distances in between the joints.
Okay, so of course, not all the building deconstruction sites are filled with high-end materials like marble designed lighting, etc. So far more others, a huge amount of other materials which are quite banal materials, often more difficultly enter in the reuse cycle. So we wanted to illustrate this at the end of the presentation with speaking about an expo by Rotor that Rotor did last year in November, December in La Loge in Elsene, which was called Life Under a Cherry Tree. So this expo was basically spotlighting specifically those materials that are difficult for reuse. So this happens for multiple reasons. So like legal regulations, planned obsolescence, evolving aesthetics, social, cultural changes, toxic substances, think of asbestos, for example. Simply said, often the recovery of very cheap materials like particle boards, cellular or aggregate concrete blocks is more expensive and complex than the manufacturing of the new product. So across the spaces in La Loge, materials were piled, stacked and heaped, awaiting an unknown future. Rather dramatically, these materials have been staged by bright construction spotlights, giving them an appearance value. So I just want to give two examples. For example, these connectivity columns, which are placed in a forest-like atmosphere. There are tons of them in the demolition sites we come across, but the reuse probability of these columns is almost zero. Nobody wants them as well because they often don't have the technical regulations sheets left for new use, or they're just not accepted in new projects. Then you have, for example, the bidet, which since the 80s is no longer a part of our custom bedrooms or hotel bedrooms, or so the bidet became obsolete under influence of changing cultural customs. Probably the popularization of toilet paper in the 60s also played a role, but so this is just not resellable. We also had a lot of bidets, but we ended up selling them at €1 a piece. Yeah, then there is there in the back here, you have the rock wool, which is actually a material that doesn't lose a lot of value over time. But the fact that it's not, the handling of rock wool gets a lot of particles out, is not that pleasant to move and take out of a building and replace. So that makes it just not reused. It's not often reused. And also the technical values of insulation after time is also put into question. So unfortunately, rock wool also doesn't really fit in this idea. Then at the end of the exhibitions, the materials were available for pickup for whoever wanted to reuse them afterwards.